Writing Matters with Dr. Troy Hicks is a Writable podcast. Find more episodes and subscribe on your favorite platforms. And if you want to learn how to grow great writers, check out Writable.com. In this episode, Troy speaks with Evan Grant, a 6th through 8th grade ELA and humanities teacher in Oregon. Evan is a speaker, former elementary school teacher, and committed to challenging the status quo in education. Evan shares some wonderful and creative tips for teachers, like banning certain words and phrases to encourage effective peer feedback and using a funnel method that involves an actual funnel to help his students become a collaborative team.
Well, welcome to this episode of our podcast. Today we are talking with Evan Grant of Tumalo Community School in Bend, Oregon. Evan, how are you today?
I'm doing well.
Great. And we're always curious to know where educators are at in their journey. So tell us a little bit about where you are and what your day-to-day life as an educator looks like right now.
Yeah, so I am currently teaching in the middle school. I'm at a K-8 school, and we have 90 total middle school students. So I get 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. I get every single middle school kid every day for 3 years. They're stuck with me. And so I teach humanities, language arts, and social studies, and I get to kind of embed those and separate those as I want to. And previously taught 4th and 5th grade in California, and then also at my current school. So elementary background, and I've been now in middle school. This is my 2nd year in middle school.
That's great. So you said you have 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, and it's a real humanities focus that you bring to all of those courses.
Yeah, exactly.
Fantastic. Well, great. Well, I know we've had a chance to talk briefly and been connected at least via email and some other asynchronous ways through Writable, and I'm so glad that we have this opportunity to talk today. So, one of the things that we're really trying to do with this series is just get right to it with the strategies. We could probably sit here and talk for the whole half hour and think about philosophy and pedagogy, and that stuff's important, but we're really just curious to know, what are the go-to strategies? What's something that you're doing with your students in your classroom right now when it comes to teaching writing that works really well for you?
Yeah. So one of my big focuses is always on outlining and creating a structure for my students' writing. I find a lot of specifically 6th graders, when they first come into middle school, they have some foundational convention skills. Most of what they've written is in story form, is what I find. So transitioning them into that informational persuasive writing, to me, outlining is the key to that. So I've really tried to think about different ways of outlining. So for example, I have students make iMovies explaining each part of the essay and walking us through that. So instead of having to write it out, they get to create it that way. Using Book Creator for an essay. So breaking down their essay throughout a Book Creator. So as they put their essay in, they're also explaining what it is that section is about. Introduction, okay, what's in the introduction? And they have to put that on the Book Creator page as kind of their outline before they really move into the essay part. I've used Writable a lot, both with me providing the outlining tool in Writable, but I've also kind of flipped that and had them help me come up with the rubric or outline that you can then load into Writable. And that's been really powerful, because then they're seeing their work get directly put into this program that they are then evaluating each other and themselves on. So I guess that's kind of my go-to first step with writing. And I find kind of the more I do that with them, the better understanding they have, and then they're able to apply it. My ultimate goal is, here's your topic, or pick your topic and use one of the tools that we've learned this year, or over the course of multiple years in my case. So ultimately working them towards finding something that works for them. I think when I was in school, I was often forced into things, and when it didn't work, and I just was kept being forced to use it. So trying to just give them a broad array of strategies to do that. Outlining.
Good. Yeah, I'd like to hear a little bit more about that scaffolding and how you move them towards independence, especially since you get to see these same students from sixth, seventh, and eighth grade. That's
Mhm.
pretty interesting. I am curious though, if you could just elaborate briefly, tell us about that iMovie strategy. Do they just record themselves on webcam talking about their outline, or do you actually have them put little video clips or photos into a timeline? Or what do they do when they use iMovie?
Yeah, it's a good question. So one of my big things with iMovie is I call it no floating heads. I don't like to just see a head talking. I kind of want to enhance that cognitive process a little bit. So I do force them to find pictures and match to what they're talking about. So
Okay.
for example, a 5-paragraph essay, we would make I would read 3 videos. So an introduction video, your body paragraphs video, and then a conclusion video. And within that, so for example, your introduction would start with a hook. So a lot of them have silly images of Captain Hook or a fish hook or something. And then they break down, okay, what comes next? Well, we provide some background information. And then they go into the thesis. So their voice recording and then finding images to support that, whether it be kind of silly cartoon images or pieces of writing where they've highlighted the thesis statement, for example, as they're talking about it. And they're short. I try to keep it 30 to 45 seconds. Otherwise, the quality tends to dip off pretty quickly. So then they have those 3 videos that they kind of have as a tool that they can then go pull out when they write. Usually I load it into a book creator just to store it nicely, and then they can also add notes and stuff on there for themselves. And then an assignment like that, I typically have them work with a partner. I just believe in that dialogue, and getting students collaborating is really powerful.
Yeah, that makes good sense. So good. So yeah, back to this idea of scaffolding with the outline and what you're starting to notice. And you said you've been at your current school. This is second year, third year?
This is my second year in the middle school, 4th year at the
Second.
school.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're just starting to see some of these kids that you've had for
Yeah.
a whole year now coming into their own. Do you feel like that outlining strategy is something that stuck with them and that you're seeing growth with that over the years? How is that going?
Yeah, I do. I think, obviously the more they practice, the better idea they get, the better grasp they have. And I think it's neat now to see my 7th and 8th graders who I had last year, when we go to write and I don't give them a specific strategy or specific outline, to see the different strategies that they generate. I usually will have, 4 or 5 different outlines up in front of the room that they can go get if they want. And what I'm finding is most students at this point don't need that. Most students are creating their own outlines on paper, still following all the rules, still following the expectations, but I feel like they have enough of a grasp on it that they're able to create their own. So that's pretty exciting. Even things like smarter balance testing, where we all know some students some students tend to take shortcuts and others really dive in. It was nice to see in an opportunity where I couldn't tell them, hey, you have to do an outline. I still saw students using a lot of the strategies. So that was interesting to see them transfer that over.
Very good. Very good. So, of course, thinking about these great teaching strategies, we're always interested too in thinking about the role of feedback in teachers' classrooms. And so, thinking about the types of feedback that you provide to students, the types of feedback that you invite students to provide to one another. Tell us a little bit about the role of feedback in your writing classroom.
Yeah, so, I know there's lots of philosophies on feedback and ideas behind it. I typically live by the philosophy that we're never done with writing and we can always keep going and keep improving. And so when I provide feedback, my feedback usually looks like a lot of questioning. I provide a lot of questions in the margins or commenting if I'm using a Google Doc, for example. Very little direct instruction to them, beyond obviously grammatical corrections when necessary. But even on the first few drafts, I try to avoid those because I really want to focus on their ideas and their thinking. And I don't want students to get discouraged with, oh, you forgot a comma here or whatever it might be. So a lot of questions just to get them to think about it. Why do you put your reasons in this order? Was that intentional or not? And then from that, usually I try to create time to meet with each student. And that's obviously a challenge, as any classroom teacher knows. so one of the things is Writable's allowed me to make it this digital, basically a digital meeting, digital conference with students with that structure. And it's super broken down, especially when the students have helped create the rubric in there. That really helps that feedback be a lot more effective, because I can spend less time explaining what each thing means, and they can really focus on the feedback they're getting. And then as far as student feedback goes, I'm always trying to find ways to do that well in the classroom, where students are taking it and really taking it seriously. And Writable, again, has allowed me to do that. Google Docs, shared docs has been a great tool, obviously, to do that. But my old teaching partner and I, Dina, Glenn, we created something called Specs, and it's all about commenting, digital commenting. So it's specific, punctuation, evidence, carefully considerate, and then sentences, and sentences is 2 or more sentences. And we really kind of preach that early in the school year of what it looks like to give feedback. And that specific piece especially is what I found one of the more challenging areas to really have students give specific feedback. And I would say it's quite a process. I'd say just about this time of year, students seem to start to get that idea of, oh, I can't just say, I liked your introduction, or you didn't give enough examples. Well, we have to really give more specific feedback. So I try to create as many opportunities as I can for students, and have them go from there.
Great. So actually that moment that you're talking about right now, that moment where you're trying to get kids to be more specific in their feedback, I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit. I mean, again, I know that, you are using Writable, and that technology platform is helpful, but even in thinking about the one-to-one conversations you have with students to help them become better, feedback providers, or in small groups or in mini lessons, like, what are the ways that you help get them from the, oh, hey, yeah, good job, to, no, let's really be specific. Let's talk about writerly moves. Let's think about mentor text. Let's try to give some encouragement and critique at the same time. Like, what are the things that you're actually doing with students in those little important conversations to help move them forward?
Yeah, I guess part of it is, if we're working on a specific skill, that oftentimes will help them. And the more we do that, then they start to understand what it looks like. So for example, with my 7th graders, I'm talking about voice right now, and those kind of illogical shifts between first, second, third person voice, and having them go through their essays and really be able to focus on that. It kind of trains them to then be able to give specific feedback. It's, for a 7th grader to just say, hey, give this essay feedback, that's a huge task, and they could go so many different directions. So really narrowing that focus has helped a lot. The other thing I've done is I've banned a few phrases, and I found that really gets students thinking. So I've banned good job, or and I usually joke like, oh, I banned good job. What do you mean? But I found that really helps. I've also banned the word thing in something, because it forces students to think beyond that. And that's been really powerful. I'll get students from, I just want to say you need to add something here. Okay, well, we can't use something, so how else are you going to say that? And really challenging them on just that vocabulary piece, to use more descriptive words to really explain. Usually they'll replace that word something with 4 sentences that really explain what they need to do. So those are some little tricks I've tried.
Yeah. Oh, I really like that. Second, I mean, certainly the eliminating the kind of generic good job or nice work or something like that, but then really forcing them to articulate, saying you can't just say thing, you've got to name the technique or the strategy that the writers should be able to use, which will then help them in their own writing as well.
Right.
So I like that one. That's really good. So great. So thinking about strategies, thinking about feedback, this can all get pretty overwhelming sometimes when you're trying to stay on top of, dozens of writers' work and conferring with them and all that. So we're really curious to know, like, what fuels you, what motivates you, and you can think about this from a couple different angles. Maybe as a writer and as a teacher who writes, what fuels you, or what fuels you just as a teacher of writing and kind of keeps you going. And then, once we hear the big idea about what fuels you, we'll be really curious to hear more of what that looks like in your day-to-day work. So what motivates you? What keeps you going as a teacher of writing and even as a writer yourself?
I think what really fuels me was reflecting on my own education, and I always felt like I was being forced to write very specific pieces growing up, and specifically longer essays on certain topics that are assigned to me. And that always bothered me. And then I became an adult and went to apply for jobs and realized that some of the skills were transferable, but they could have been a lot more meaningful for me. So I think what fuels me is making writing meaningful for kids to help connect those dots. For reluctant writers, for kids that, they want to go to trade school or they want to do something maybe not in the academia world. And I struggled making those connections as a kid. So what fuels me is always finding ways to do that and finding ways to give them an audience and give them choice in their writing. No matter what you do, you're going to have to communicate in writing somehow. And
that seems especially important for the middle school audience when they're kind of coming of age and trying to figure out exactly who they are and what they believe, being able to have that audience. So do you have any kind of specific examples of how you enact that idea of choice and that idea that they do have an audience that they can speak to? Are there other strategies or tips or techniques that we haven't had a chance to talk about yet that really demonstrate the ways in which you're able to provide them with those choices and audiences?
Yeah, I think it's, for me, I'll think I have a great assignment and I'll create something, and then I usually try to sit back on it for a little bit and think, okay, am I really doing what I'm trying to accomplish here? For example, I have students do book reports each month. Well, your traditional book report might be a summary or a review or something like that. I've created kind of 6 different options for students. But I've also created, just this past month, I was having kids that weren't reading, and then their writing was sloppy because they didn't care. And so I kind of reflected on that. And so this month I allowed them to go to find articles on a specific topic that they chose and read those and then write about those. So instead of putting together this long book summary, they summarize an article and then write a response to it. I call it a reaction response. So, it's a topic sentence, a quote from the article, and then analysis. So just thinking about ways where I'm not forcing kids and, where they're pulling their hair out, writing about something that they don't really care. As long as I can still work on those writing skills with them, a lot of the times the topic is a lot less important, I've found. And especially in middle school, I think letting kids write with their opinions and share their voice, no matter what it is.
Yeah. So as one kind of quick follow-up and perhaps a way to think about closing this, what are the topics and opinions that your students in Oregon are most often thinking about nowadays? Do you see some trends or some things that probably resonate for all middle school kids, but I'm just wondering what's happening in your community and in your state, in your area of the world? Are there things that they're really picking up on and writing about?
Yeah, I think, well, you get your classic no homework topics like that, or the kids that are going to write about sports. And I had a great one on child leashes. Kids didn't like child leashes, the backpacks that parents walk their kids around Disneyland with. So those are just kind of some funny ones. But I saw some pretty insightful ones this round about, for example, immigration. We've been talking about that with my 8th graders, and I had 2 or 3 kids choose to write about that. We're studying the Constitution. I had a student who has shown very little interest in social studies, so it seems, do all of their articles on different parts of the Constitution. So it's interesting to see what they pick, and then kind of how they respond. Sometimes it's really surprised me how they've responded.
Wow, That's really interesting. You've got a middle school kid really digging into the Constitution and thinking about all the intricacies of that.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So it seems to me that another really important aspect of this is helping students figure out what topics to choose. How does that work for you?
Yeah, so I use a funnel method, and I work with my kids on this funnel method. So they either start too big. A lot of kids want to start too big, and then you have to funnel them down. And I have a physical funnel, and we work in a team. So I'll put them in teams of 3 or 4, and they help funnel it down to what that team decides would be kind of a feasible amount or depth for their topic. And then, but I also flip the funnel, because you'll get some kids that are so narrow. You're like, I don't think we're going to get 5 paragraphs out of this. How can we broaden it? So, but that's in that teamwork, that collaborative piece has really been powerful, because then it gets more students invested. They've got an audience. And they're almost giving a sales pitch for their topic. And that's been really helpful for them to be able to, when they go to write, be a lot more effective, instead of that kind of frozen moment of, oh my gosh, I have no clue where to start, or writing 3 sentences and, I've said everything I need to say. So that's been a helpful tool as well.
That's great. And that kind of fits in during the outlining and brainstorming process, or is that something that happens at all stages of the writing process, just depending on the kid and depending on the topic?
Yeah, I think typically we do it in the beginning, but then obviously as you go, sometimes you discover things, or your writing starts to go in a path you didn't necessarily expect, and you have to adjust in the moment.
Well, Evan, thank you so much for what you do for your kids in the classroom every day, and thank you for spending some time with us.
No, thank you. My pleasure.
Writing Matters with Dr. Troy Hicks is a Writable podcast. Discover more episodes and subscribe on your favorite streaming platforms, or check out filmed episodes on YouTube. Writable offers more than 600 writing prompts and assignments, with a range of feedback and assessment tools to help you build more purposeful, proficient writers. Learn more at writable.com.